The British tried it. The Soviets tried it. The Americans tried it. Different centuries, different armies, different reasons. But one repeated mistake. They thought taking Kabul meant controlling Afghanistan. It does not. That is why Afghanistan is often called the graveyard of empires. But the phrase hides the most important part. Afghanistan is not impossible to invade. Powerful outsiders have entered it again and again. The real problem starts after they get in. In August 2021, the world saw that problem in real time. The Taliban entered Kabul. The Afghan government collapsed. The president fled. And after 20 years of war, money, training, elections, and foreign support, the United States left Afghanistan without the political result it wanted. But this was not a brand new story. It was the latest version of a much older pattern. And start with the British. Britain was not trying to control Afghanistan simply because it wanted another mountain kingdom. It was worried about empire. British India was the crown jewel of Britain's global power. To British strategists, Afghanistan mattered because it sat between British India and Russia's expanding influence in Central Asia. This rivalry became known as the Great Game. From London, Afghanistan looked like a buffer zone. But from inside Afghanistan, British interference looked like exactly that: foreign interference. In 1839, British forces entered Afghanistan and installed a ruler they believed would be friendlier to British interests. At first, it looked like success. They reached Kabul. They had a government partner. They had military power. But occupation changed the politics around them. A ruler who depended on foreign troops could look weak. Foreign soldiers could look like an insult. Local bargains could shift. And the longer the British stayed, the more their presence became the issue. The result was disaster. In 1842, a British retreat from Kabul became one of the most famous imperial catastrophes of the century. The lesson was not that Britain could never enter Afghanistan. It had entered. The lesson was that entering Afghanistan and building a stable political order, there were completely different tasks. More than a century later, the Soviet Union faced its own version of the same problem. In 1978, Afghanistan's communist government came to power after a revolution. Its reforms, factional struggles, and repression helped trigger resistance across the country. The Soviet Union feared losing influence on its southern border and worried that instability could spread. So in December 1979, Soviet forces invaded. Militarily, the Soviet Union could do enormous things quickly. It could send tanks and aircraft. It could take Kabul. It could replace one leader with another. It could hold major cities and bases. But then the war moved into the countryside. The Soviet-backed government had ministries, uniforms, and international support from Moscow. But resistance groups, often called the Mujahideen, drew on local grievances, religion, nationalism, outside support, and the simple fact that many Afghans did not want a foreign army deciding their future. The Soviet Union could win battles. But winning battles did not end the war. Because every time military force destroyed one position, the deeper question remained: who had legitimacy in the village afterward? Who could keep order without Soviet troops? Who could survive once Moscow's patience ran out? The answer was not the one the Soviets wanted. After nearly a decade, the Soviet Union withdrew in 1989. Again, the pattern was not simple. The Soviet-backed government did not fall immediately. Afghan politics did not become peaceful. The country descended into further conflict. But the larger lesson was clear. A superpower could occupy, spend, bomb, advise, and build an allied state, yet still fail to create a political order that outlasted the conditions that produced it. Then came the United States. After the attacks of September 11, 2001, the United States entered Afghanistan to target al-Qaeda and remove the Taliban government that had hosted it. The first phase looked astonishingly successful. The Taliban regime collapsed quickly. Kabul fell. American air power, special operations forces, Afghan anti-Taliban partners, and international support produced a rapid victory. If Afghanistan were impossible to invade, the story would have ended right there. But it did not, because the mission changed. The United States and its allies were no longer only trying to remove a regime. They were trying to help build a new Afghan state strong enough to secure the country, keep the Taliban from returning, and survive with less foreign support. That was a much harder job. It required security forces that could stand on their own. a government people believed in, courts and police that were not seen as predatory, local allies who were not simply using foreign money to settle their own rivalries, and a strategy that matched the realities of Afghan society, not just the timelines of foreign capitals. Over time, the gap became visible. On paper, the Afghan Republic had elections, ministries, an army, police, and international backing. On the ground, many Afghans experienced corruption, insecurity, factional politics, civilian casualties, local power brokers, and a government that often felt distant outside major cities. Meanwhile, the Taliban could survive. They could retreat. They could use rural networks. They could benefit from sanctuaries and support across the border in Pakistan. And perhaps most importantly, they could wait. That is one of the most uncomfortable parts of Afghanistan's history for outside powers. Foreign armies usually have clocks. They have budgets, elections, public opinion, casualty tolerance, strategic distractions. Local insurgents may have a much longer timeline. They do not have to defeat the foreign power everywhere. They only have to survive long enough for the foreign power to decide the cost is no longer worth it. So why did three very different powers run into versions of the same problem? Because taking Kabul is not the same thing as controlling Afghanistan. And controlling Afghanistan is not the same thing as governing it. To understand that, separate three things that often get mixed together: military victory, political authority, and local legitimacy. Military victory means you can defeat an army, seize a road, take a base, or enter the capital. Political authority means you can give orders and have institutions that actually carry them out. Local legitimacy means enough people believe that the system has a right to rule, or at least that cooperating with it is better than resisting it. In Afghanistan, outside powers have often achieved the first one. Sometimes they have built the second one, at least on paper. But the third one is where the trouble begins. Start with the map. Afghanistan sits at the crossroads of Central Asia, South Asia, and the Middle East. It borders Iran and Pakistan, touches China through a narrow mountain corridor, and sits below Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, and Tajikistan. On a flat political map, it looks like one country that can be colored in with one shade. But on the ground, Afghanistan is mountains, deserts, valleys, high passes, isolated communities, and difficult roads. The Hindu Kush cuts through the country like a wall of stone. A road that looks simple on a map may be a mountain route. A province that looks close to Kabul may be politically and socially far away. This does not mean geography explains everything. That would be too simple. Plenty of mountainous countries have been controlled by strong states, and Afghanistan has had powerful rulers of its own. But geography raises the cost of control. It makes supply lines longer. It makes armies dependent on roads and passes. It gives local fighters places to hide, regroup, and wait. And it makes it easier for the capital to lose touch with what is actually happening in the valleys. That last point matters most. Afghanistan has often had a political structure where the capital matters, but the capital is not everything. Kabul can be the seat of government. It can be where foreign embassies open, where ministries issue orders, where outside powers announce progress. But much of Afghanistan has historically depended on local authority. Community leaders, tribal networks, religious figures, regional commanders, patronage, family ties, and bargains that outsiders do not always understand. So when an outside power takes Kabul, it may control the symbol of the state, but it still has to answer harder questions. Who actually controls the road to the next valley? Who settles disputes? Who protects families? Who collects taxes? Who is trusted? And who will still be there when the foreign army leaves? This is why Afghanistan is so difficult to explain with one cause. It was not just mountains. It was not just religion. It was not just tribal politics. It was not just foreign mistakes. It was the way all of those factors interacted. The mountains made control expensive. Local politics made authority fragmented. Foreign occupation made allied governments easier to portray as imposed. Outside money distorted incentives. Cross-border sanctuaries kept conflicts alive. And foreign powers repeatedly believed that enough force, enough aid, and enough time could solve a problem that was fundamentally political. This is the real meaning behind the graveyard of empires phrase. Afghanistan does not defeat empires because it is protected by magic. It defeats them when they confuse access with authority. It defeats them when they assume Kabul speaks for every valley. It defeats them when they build a government that depends more on foreign support than local trust. And it defeats them when they enter with a military plan, but discover they need a political settlement. So why is Afghanistan so hard to conquer? Because conquest is not one thing. If conquest means crossing the border, Afghanistan can be entered. If conquest means taking the capital, Afghanistan has been taken. If conquest means winning battles, outside powers have won many. But if conquest means building lasting control over a country of mountains, local loyalties, regional rivalries, religious authority, foreign borders, and deep suspicion of outsiders, then Afghanistan becomes something very different, not unconquerable, but extraordinarily hard to govern from the outside. That is the missing context. Afghanistan's history is not a story of empires failing to get in. It is a story of empires getting in, then discovering that the country they thought they had taken was much larger, more local, and more politically complicated than the map made it look. If you like my content, please like and follow for more.